Can I see questions for either Charis or Maeve or both, please?
I was wondering if you would clarify a little bit exactly how you saw, if I understood correctly, you mentioned that you thought non-restorative justice procedures, regular punitive, if you will, procedures are still perhaps necessary. I don't remember exactly the language that you used to deal with sexual crimes against women. And I wasn't exactly sure I understood it fully, so I was wondering if you would just explain a little bit more how it is that you see this to be the case. Because it came off as a critique on restorative justice, and that's what I was interested in. I have colleagues who work restoratively on these issues, so I'm curious.
So we've got the questions?
Maybe if there's any, are there any more? How many have you got?
Just one.
Yes, please.
My question is also to Charis, and that's about the complexity of domesticity in cases of domestic violence, particularly amongst oppressed and marginalised women. You know, you talked about groups of marginalised women. The group I'm particularly thinking of are homeless women, where domestic violence, so-called domestic violence, occurs in public spaces, where so it's like a violence without borders, because it doesn't occur in a domestic environment. But within the criminal justice system, so even though their experiences might be sexual violence or rape and/or rape, the criminal justice system still absorb these experiences within discourses of domestic violence. So I was wondering if there was any issue that you foresaw in defining domesticity and domestic violence amongst marginalised groups such as immigrants and women who have experienced violence and genocide.
Thanks. Can I suggest that you answer those two questions and then we come back to questions for Maeve after that? Yeah.
Thank you. To begin with the second, I mentioned the US case trying to show that there was a kind of expansion of protection of women so that they could stand their ground by giving them the right to expel the intruder or a person against whom a warrant of exclusion has been issued. And I said that this is, we need here the feminist approaches to understand that there are perplexities with this, because in the first glance it seems to be very progressive, but underneath this you can trace attitudes to handle women as passive, as victims, as powerless, and so on. Now, as to the cases of public spaces or a case of domestic violence in the frame of marginalized people, there the perplexities are more and deeper, I think. If one would like to expand this complex issue also to these fields, he will be confronted with great difficulties, I can admit this. But I think that one can here have a system of expanding protection against domestic violence, even in public spaces, even in these fields of marginalization, plus of course, great scope of protection measures, of assistance, and so on. I cannot see in the frame of our system something better. As to the first question, I am not against the restoration in general. I tried to underline that in cases of racial violence or violence against foreigners or violence against children and especially violence against women, you cannot do a good job without underscoring also the stigmatization aspect and dimension of restoration. Or you can do the work by adding this dimension. This does not mean, of course, by definition, that we can remain with the old-fashioned state-based system. But we have to see here that a clear-cut distinction between rehabilitation, restoration, and sanctioning system with retaliatory dimensions is not possible, because then you are forced to deal with violence against women as if this was some kind of dispute which can be settled in a very good atmosphere of discourse. And so this was my critical point, not against restoration in general.
Is there time, Chair, for a small exchange or not?
Yes, please,
Thank
yeah.
Thank you. I would respond to what you're saying with my perception, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that the space from which you are conceiving restorative justice reminds me of the way the retributive justice system thinks of restorative justice, as if it is this paradigm where people get together for forgiveness and we try to work on the brighter side of things, but it's not really a substantive model through which to address the very serious problem of harms that happens between people. And there are those who are working. Emily Garter, for example, in Minnesota, is working on exactly domestic violence, sexual violence issues. She's running a restorative justice program that they're trying to work it through and is working with a local judge to push these so-called crimes out of the retributive justice system and to process them entirely through the restorative. It's very, very difficult work, extremely time-consuming, questionable results so far, but she's working on it. That's what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that my perception, if it's correct, of how you are thinking of the restorative justice system is more from the way the retributive justice system looks at restorative justice and not the way a defender of restorative justice or practitioner of restorative justice would speak of it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Do you want to respond?
Just a comment. I think that what I wanted to stress is that, I'm not against restoration. I insist on this. But I say that in a system of restoration concerning violence against women, don't we have to take under consideration very seriously censure, kind of soft retaliation, something like don't do this again, kind of stigmatization, as something where retaliation or fragments of it can be traced. Insofar, I agree with you that this is not retributivism, this is not retaliation, of course, but it is not kind of restoration in a purist way of thinking. And insofar, I agree with you that this is not restoration viewed from the retributivist point of view, because they make a clear-cut distinction between the two. I don't make this distinction. I say, opposed to this, that even in restoration, if we have to deal seriously and effectively with violence against women, you have to make some negotiations, some let's say, concessions to retributive elements in the sanctioning. So I think we are not disagreeing in the substance.
We will continue privately.
Okay.
Did you want to make a very
brief?
Can you be brief?
I just wondered, your understanding of a feminist perspective sounds to me very much a very narrow-minded understanding of feminism, because if you take a postmodern feminist perspective or queer perspective, you can challenge, for example, the problem of private and public spaces and intervene more. And also your understanding then of restorative justice or mediation becomes a far more, I don't know, involves far more levels, because it would involve, for example, the media sphere, where we continue to see patriarchal understandings of gender, patriarchal understandings of sexuality. And these would become part of these mediation and restoration aspects, and at least prevent a secondary rape that would happen often in a traditional court setting. That's all I wanted to say.
Very quickly, do you want?
Okay, I understand the objection. I think well, as I said, for instance, kind of mockery against the mainstream paradigms of viewing the women and so on, as Butler would have it. It's something I respect very much. I don't think that through this focusing on pure performativity and abandoning purely the state-based system, we can do the very best of the works we can do. Okay, this very different points of view, I think. I can understand what you say, especially as to the queer theory and so on. Everything can be deconstructed. Everything can be shown as fundamentally patriarchal or whatever. But if you are going to have a political stance, if you are going to work politically, I think you have to abandon this purist deconstructionist way of thinking. This is my point.